Have you ever wondered how important you really are? Or have you ever asked yourself, does anyone really care about the real me? Does my presence really matter? And if so, to whom? Now, if we are honest with ourselves, we will admit that these questions haunt us more than we like to admit. So what we do is sometimes we ignore them. Sometimes what we'll do is we turn to others for affirmation. Or we'll find some cute little saying on Facebook that affirms our worth, and we'll repeat it over and over again until finally we're convinced of it or we fall asleep. You know, there's a lot of self-help books out there, a lot of self-help courses out there that deal with a lot of these questions of self-worth, affirmation. But yet, by the very fact that these books, these courses exist, show that the problem is very real in our world. And truth is, we live in what I call a Ziggy world. I don't know if anybody knows what a Ziggy world is. Anybody know what a Ziggy world is? Anybody remember the Ziggy character, the cartoon strip? Anybody remember that? Got a couple? Let's see if I can get this thing working. Yeah, well, that would be, yeah. I'm on. Oh, maybe I'm not. I'm on?
Can you shoot it back here?
Well, I'm supposedly on. There we go, okay. Ziggy. Welcome to my world. Maybe you can identify. It's amazing how you can be in a crowded place and yet not feel close to anyone. Wrong numbers can be a real nuisance, but then again, if it wasn't for wrong numbers, I wouldn't get any calls. Okay, get ready. He's coming in now. And he looks like he's had a typical Ziggy day. Pretend you're excited to see him. He needs it. I like this one. I like that one. Now this one I like. We've come a long way. As a matter of fact, let's say that in your case, a defeatist attitude is quite appropriate. We live in a Ziggy world. Do you know that because of the rapid population explosion, we're becoming more and more of a number and less of a person with an actual real face? And I remember years ago seeing a half-hour sitcom. And in this half-hour sitcom, the employee, he quit his job in the small-town corner store because he was attracted to the bright lights of a large grocery store chain. Now, in this small store, 2 or 3 employees, the boss knew his name, and he knew his boss by name. In his new workplace, he never saw the boss, and he was referred to not by name, but by number. He was number 27. So after hearing number 27 for several days, no wonder that he quit his job, packed up, and returned back to his old job. Joseph Stalwell writes, he says, I don't know of a more powerful urge in the human experience than that of the desire to count for something, to be affirmed, to sense with assurance that we have some sort of worth, some sort of dignity. Now, in this half-hour comedy, number 27, he had the opportunity to go back. The job that he had left was still there for him. But you know, the problem is that for us, we can't go back. See, our world is becoming so big so technological that our individual identity is being lost. It's being robbed from us. And really, we can't do anything about it. And then there's our universe. Our universe is viewed by scientists as being so vast that the Earth is actually seen as insignificant, a speck of dust surrounded by galaxies. And I wonder where that leaves you and I. Standing out here looking at the stars certainly makes a person feel small and insignificant. I can do without that. One astronomer, he had just finished some impressive lecture on the Milky Way, and one of the listeners asked him and said, if our world is so little and our universe is so great, can we really believe that God pays any attention to us? And that's why I like Psalm 139. That's why Psalm 139 is so beautiful here. Because just when we're left feeling insignificant, small, maybe not much value, we come across the words of Psalm 139. And if you look at Psalm 139 in your Bible there, part of it's in the bulletin, if you look at verse 1 to 6, you're going to see a few things here. First of all, you're going to see how well God knows us. Psalm 139, 1 to 6. Psalmist starts off and he says, O Lord, you've searched me. You know me. You know when I sit, when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You're familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you know it completely, O Lord. You hem me in, behind and before. You have laid your hand on me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me to attain. So what we are in Psalm 39, what we're being introduced to here is an omniscient God. A God that is all-knowing, meaning there is not anything that God does not know. Look at verse 1. Starts off and he says, you have searched me. The word search here means explored, examined. And what David was saying was that Lord had examined him. The Lord had explored his whole being. And so think of yourself as a cave. And the Lord being the very one who knows, every turn, every protruding rock, every tunnel within that cave. Nothing inside that cave is outside of his knowledge. And that is how well God knows us. Then you go to verse 2. He says, you know when I sit and when I rise. Years ago, small town, I heard of a town where those that lived close to the minister's house actually watched the house to see what time he would get up in the morning. I mean, it's a terrible thing for a minister, terrible, to sleep in. Terrible thing. So what the minister did was he would set an alarm early, he would get up, go into a couple rooms, turn on the lights, then go back to bed. But today, of course, we know things have changed. It's gotten better since then. Now, we have light timers, and we have that thing called the Echo Dot. I got one for my wife for her birthday. Do you know what the Echo Dot is? You've seen it advertised on commercials. Alexis, turn on lights. You've seen those commercials? The psalmist says, you know when I sit and when I rise. In one church I was at, there was a seniors complex right across the street. And each of the 5 floors of the seniors complex had a large window that would overlook right to the church. And all the residents would gather at the end of the hallway and watch me go in, come out every day. Unless, of course, I looked at them and I waved. You'd really see them scurry then. But it would drive me crazy. They would tell me what day I went in. They would tell me when I went in. They'd tell me when I left. They'd tell me if I was walking. They'd tell me if I was driving. They knew everything about me. But that's how well God knows us. He knows when we sit and when we rise. Verse 3, David says, you perceive my thoughts from afar. You see, God knows our thoughts, our words, before they're even lodged in our brain or expressed in words. Now, we can say that someone knows us inside out. But you know, when we say that with God, we speak the truth. Verse 3 says, you discern my going out and my lying down. You're familiar with all my ways. It's not that God concerns himself with this mental and this verbal trivia. It's simply that God is all-knowing. So how well does God know us? How well are we known? I think these verses show us that God could not know us any better than he already does. You ever hear of anybody who says or has those nobody knows me blues? You ever hear that? And I think that's true when you look at it from a worldly point of view. But what we have to do is factor in God into the equation. And it's completely different because God knows us completely. And what it is it depends on our outlook. Do we look around in our world to see who knows us? Or do we look up? Do we look up? Look at verse 6. David says, this is mind-boggling. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to obtain. The fact that God knew David this well, it blew his mind. Psalm 8 says, what is man that thou art mindful of him? Who am I? Who am I that God should know me this well? See, the psalmist, he knew how well God knew him. But he also knew how close God is to us. Verse 7 says, David asks, God, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? You see, God is not only omniscient or all-knowing, God is omnipresent. God is all places. Remember Jonah? Thought he could run away from God. So off he took off. But run as he might, he was never able to distance himself from God. And yet, David here is not trying to flee from God. He's just standing in awe that God is always going to be present. There is nowhere he can go and be away from God. If you look at verse 8 and 9, David speaks of all these distant and remote places. And he counts on, if he's there, he's going to meet God there. Verse 9 says, if I should rise on the wings of dawn and settle at the far side of the sea, even there, I'm going to find God. So how close is God to us? It's impossible for you to go any place where you are not going to find God. If you look at verse 10, after saying all these outrageous places where he might go, he exclaims that God's hand is everywhere to guide him. Today there might be 7, 8 billion people in our world, and our whole universe might be mind-boggling in size, but no matter where we are, God is there. And because God is always present, with his people, we're never alone. And we're never without his resources. Hebrews 13 and 8 says, the writer says, keep yourselves free from the love of money and be content with what you have because God has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. So how well are we known? We are known completely. How close is God to you? He's there always. But if you look at verse 13 to 18, I think this is in the bulletin there, verses 13 to 18, you're going to see, and this is nice, how special or how carefully God has made us. That book that Sarah read, it has You Are Special. A few weeks ago, I was helping my mom in Prince Rupert downsize her house. Actually, I've been doing this for quite a while. I go up to Rupert, got rid of my truck, got a small car, go up to Rupert, she loads up the car. Bring it all back, take it to the thrift store, take it wherever. But I was helping her downsize her house, and one of the things she got rid of and gave to me to take to the thrift store was her collection of souvenir spoons. And these have been on the wall for years in Prince Rupert. She had quite a collection. She had souvenir spoons from all across Canada, places she'd been to. People had given her spoons, some from the States, some from overseas. And it used to be that souvenir spoon collecting was quite a hobby. And you used to see souvenir spoons, different people's walls, spoon racks. And I remember a spoon rack I made years ago for my grandmother. I made it for her for Christmas. And I'm going to be the first to tell you that I am not a carpenter. My wife will be the second to tell you, but she won't add to that. I attempted to make the spoon rack in the shape of Canada. And when I finished, it looked more like a whale than it did Canada. And I don't think she knew it was Canada. I had to tell her that. But my grandmother loved it. But, well, that's what grandma... Quiet back there. That's what grandmothers are supposed to do, though. She loved it. And then there are those spoon racks you could buy. I don't know if you can ever buy them anymore. And they're not bad. Much better than anything I could do. They're mostly made out of pressed wood, though. They're factory made. They're mass produced. And then there are those spoon racks that my dad made. I mentioned before, my dad is an excellent carpenter. His hobby was his workshop. When he retired, he wasn't bored. He'd be down in the basement there working in his workshop. And he was good at what he did. His spoon racks, and everything else he did for that matter, were perfect. They far exceeded anything that you could buy. Now, my dad, he wasn't in it for the money. He would store all these things up in the upstairs attic, which I'm starting to bring back home now. But he was out to do a good job. Each one was hand-done, handcrafted, created by him, then stained to perfection. Now, what made my dad's spoon racks so good was that they were created by an expert craftsman. Not just a craftsman, but an expert craftsman. And I can honestly say I have yet to find his equal. I'm a little biased maybe, but he was good. He was good. Now look at yourself. Look at yourself. Then look at verse 13. You see, you and I have been created by an expert or a master craftsman. Matter of fact, we've been created by the master craftsman. David, referring to God, says, "You created me. You knit me in my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb." So think of it. You and I, the very workmanship of God. And I haven't heard this saying for a while, but you remember the saying, "I'm okay, I must be okay because God doesn't make junk." What the author realized here was the fact that God had made him. Therefore, he is special. And there's that connection between what Sarah read and Psalm 139. See, David realized how special he was. Look at verse 14. David said, "I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful." Not just the works out there, but us. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. And you know, I was thinking about it. I never, ever saw my dad make junk. Look at verse 15. "My frame was not hidden from you." See, God knew every bone in our body. When you and I were being formed in the womb, no one saw us, but God was there. He knit us together. And so then if we leave Psalm 139, and if we look at Genesis for a moment, what do we see in Genesis? You don't hear this in our world. Maybe this is the problem. But what do we see in Genesis? God making man in his image. You have God there, and he's saying, "Let us make man in our image." And then it says he saw everything that he had made. After he had made man, he says he saw everything he had made, and it was very good. Sin has tarnished that image. I don't need to tell you that. Sin has done a number on the human race, those dots that are being put on us. But despite Satan's best efforts to ruin and destroy you and I, he can't reverse the fact that you and I have been made by the Master. We've been made in the very image of God. And that's what gives life its value. We have been made in the image of God. That's what makes me, you, special. So how special are we in the world's eyes? How much worth do we have in the world's eyes? Like in the book, maybe some have talents, maybe some of this, some of that. But in the world's eyes, not really that special. But in God's eyes, understand that God, the very creator of the universe, has made us. And we are special to him. And so I'm going to pull up that book that Sarah was reading from. And think of Psalm 139 as I share a couple of pages here. Punchinello walked up the narrow path to the top of the hill, stepped into the big shop. His wooden eyes widened at the size of everything. I'm not staying here. And he turned to leave. Punchinello. Punchinello stopped. Punchinello, how good to see you. You know my name, the little Warmick asked. Of course I do. I made you. Eloy stooped down and picked him up and set him on the bench. Looks like you've been given some bad marks. I didn't mean to, Eli. I really tried hard. Oh, you don't have to defend yourself to me, child. I don't care what the other Wormicks think. You don't? No, and you shouldn't either. Who are they to give stars or dots? They're Wormicks, just like you. What they think doesn't matter, Punchinello. All that matters is what I think. And I think you're very special. Eli looked at Punchinello, put his hands on those small wooden shoulders, and spoke very softly. Because you're mine. That is why you matter to me. I love this line. Every day, I'd been hoping you'd come. The stickers only stick if they matter to you. The more you trust my love, the less you care about those stickers. Remember, Eli said as Wormick walked out the door, you are special because I made you. And I don't make mistakes. We are not insignificant. We are just a speck. We are not just a speck in a vast universe. Not only did God carefully design us, he knows us, and he's close to us. Eli, in the story, says it best. And when he says, and this is the invitation, he says, every day I've been hoping you would come. The more you trust my love, the less you will care about those stickers. We sang, I Love You, written in red. Very beautiful song. I hadn't heard that before. Eli said, and this is what God says, he says, come and see me every day. And let me remind you how much I care. Come and see me every day and let me remind you of how much I care. Every day, he's hoping we will come. The more we trust in his love, the less we're going to worry about the world. And the invitation is there. If anybody wants to pray, he says, I want you to come. I want you to come. The more you care about my love, the less it'll all matter. He invites us to the cross.